Can't believe you swore on the podcast. Scandalous.
No.
He does more than I think he realizes or intends to.
Think I'm scared to swear in the pod?
I remember on one of the early episodes you were like, I dare someone to find me dropping an F-bomb on the pod.
Welcome to I'd Buy That for $1, a podcast about inexpensive, common, and underappreciated records that are waiting to be rediscovered. I'm your host, Sean Hartman, and despite all my rage, I'm still a life lover.
Aw. That's kind of heartwarming, actually. Kind of like the song Life Lover. But we'll get there.
Yeah, there you go. We'll get there.
I'm co-host Jeremy, and I'm just one of the guys here today.
You are, aren't you?
Yeah?
Well, I'm co-host Peter Cook, and I am for the third year in a row, the top Tupperware salesman in the Midwest.
Do you feel like your achievements in the Tupperware universe have been properly noted and appreciated?
I do. I got Tuppies for days.
Is that the award for...
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
great.
Recognition.
Love for people to get their proper recognition, which is why today I have brought Phranc and their solo first album, Folksinger.
Folksinger. Phranc is this isn't that guy with the big head, right? The big fake head.
No,
Not that Phranc.
this is your average all-American Jewish lesbian folk singer.
Ah, yes.
Phranc,
Of course.
spelled with a PH and a C at the end.
Yeah.
And let's just play a cut right out the gate here so you can hear what Phranc sounds like. I'm going to go with One of the Girls.
All right. Let's do that.
We're talking side A, track 5.
The girls are sitting out by the pool. Quite a few live in Malibu. They've got the sandwiches in their igloo cooler. The guys are laying out. They're pretty buff dudes. Me, I'm working on my tan tube. Every day we get up at 5, jump in the pool, practice our butterfly, swimming till we're dead, then run to the showers, shampoo each other's heads. Jen, Jenny, Tana, Pam, and Debbie. Are some of the girls. Jen, Jenny, Tana, Pam, and Debbie. Are some of the girls. I've always been one of the dudes with my flat top and my combat boots. Now I'm learning all the thrills come with wearing espadrilles.
when I was listening to this record earlier today, there was something kind of familiar about her vocals on here, but I couldn't quite place it. And just now, listening back to this track, it hit me. This song in particular actually reminds me a lot of Joni Mitchell, especially in the vocal delivery and just the way the song is structured and the kind of playfulness with the delivery in there. There's some definite influence going on, I think.
Yeah, and even the strumming of the guitar, I feel like Joni had songs that she would kind of do that driving strumming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't even know where to start with Phranc here. I'll start with how I found this.
Yeah.
This is actually a pretty recent grab for me. I was at a record store here in town with a friend of mine, and I'm rifling through, and I'm like, what is this? You know, this, I thought it was a dude at first on the cover, and has a flat top, spells their name with a PH and a C at the end, and it's called Folksinger, and it looks like it's from the 80s. So I'm looking at the back of it, and it's a Rhino Records release, which seemed a little unusual to me at the, mid 80s. And I also noticed there was a cover of Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, a really intense and amazing Bob Dylan song.
Yeah.
And I was like, I have to go put this on the listening table and see what this is.
Yeah, that would catch my attention too, because that is perhaps my favorite Bob Dylan song. It's as depressing as it is. It's a excellently written and powerful song.
Yeah. So I proceed to throw it on the listening table, and a female voice comes through, and then I'm even more intrigued. Like, what in the world? And it's a great album. As you already kind of noted, the similarities with Joni Mitchell, there's like a ton of clever wordplay, which is super up my alley. There's political stuff in here, also super up my alley. And so that's how I found this.
Yeah, I had never heard of this artist, but then looking into her background, I realized that I had heard some stuff that she had been involved in previously.
Oh, yeah. So here's a crazy thing as well. I, for some reason, very shortly after picking this up, was like, oh, I should watch those Decline of Western Civilization movies. And for some reason, I started with the third one, went back to the first one, and then watched the second one, which is a crazy order. Don't watch it in that direction. Just watch it in order. But while it was playing, I spotted Phranc in the movie, and I was like, what in the world?
In the first one.
In the first Decline of Western Civilization with the band Catholic Discipline. And we'll get into why Phranc was on stage playing with Catholic Discipline.
That's like a hardcore punk band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get there, but we should probably start from the top unless you have some history with Phranc there, Sean.
I do not. I was kind of aware of some of the bands that Phranc was a part of before this, but overall, this is pretty much entirely off my radar. I will say that the first time I listened to it, I definitely thought right away, yes, this sounds like a Jeremy record. This completely tracks that this is his pick.
Yeah, it was, I don't get these moments very often these days where I find a thing so up my alley that I haven't heard before, but it does keep happening, so.
I hope so.
And it's a cheap record too. I looked this up. You can find this one real cheap, plentiful.
Yeah, I got it for $5, and it's from a place that overprices everything. So I won't say their name because that wouldn't be nice.
Well,
but $5 is like the lowest price they put on records at this store.
There are a number of places that operate that way nowadays. I feel like in some cases the dollar bin has become the $5 bin.
Yeah. Inflation, right?
These times, I tell ya.
These times. Well, let's talk a little about Phranc. Phranc was born in 1957 in Santa Monica, California.
Like the Everclear song.
Just like the Everclear song about being born in 1957.
Yes.
Phranc's parents named Phranc Susan Gottlieb and grew up in California. And Phranc was into Janice Ian, who we had covered previously, and Alex Dobkin, who was a Jewish lesbian communist folk singer. So kind of the predecessor for Phranc. Also makes interesting, cool tunes if you're into this. I should probably have saved that for the recommended albums part at the end, but alas.
Here we are.
Here we are. And Alan Sherman was also a big influence.
Like, hello, mudda.
Yes.
Hello, fada.
And you can hear it. If you listen to these songs, like some of them tend more like almost goofy. Like it's political, it's like intelligently wordy, but also like playful and goofy in certain songs. And you can hear that kind of Alan Sherman influence.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of political folk that's also on the playful side.
Yeah, definitely. This is a continuation in that vein.
Yeah.
Phranc's mother got her into art, which would become a big part of Phranc's life throughout her life, including now. I'll say more on that later. We'll leave that at that for now. She started learning guitar as a teenager, started surfing at age 9, and she continued surfing at least into the 90s. I couldn't find her saying anything about surfing after the 1990s, but she was a big-time surfer, living that California life.
Yeah, must be nice.
Peter and I are currently sweltering in Michigan's muggy summer, so
yeah,
Peter's wishing for a little ocean breeze right now.
Bring it on.
Also, Peter's had a lifelong dream to be a surfer. Unfulfilled.
I gotta say, I've done it, and it's way harder than it looks. It is so hard.
I watched people surfing in Hawaii when I was there a few years ago, and I was like, whoa, that looks way harder than it was in the like California games when I played those on the video game system.
Yeah, I thought as a longtime skateboarder, I'd just be able to pick it right up, and like, no, you have to be like good at swimming, and it's like a whole different thing, and yeah. Anyways.
Well, there goes that lifelong dream for me.
No, you can still do it. I'll do it with you.
Okay.
When we go to LA.
Try Lake Michigan.
Oh no, the waves there suck. Anyways, Phranc left home at 17 after coming out to her parents. She said she knew she was a lesbian as a kid, and her parents just like didn't want to believe it, and then she like came out again, and they were like, that's not cool with us. But they did end up reconciling, and she said she was close to her parents like by her mid-20s. In an interview I saw, she said they'd already like reconciled and they're close again. So that's good, because that doesn't happen for everybody.
Very true.
But she began working on projects at the Women's Building in LA and was actively in lesbian separatist communities that she described as militant. And that's where she adopted the name Phranc. Yeah, with a PH and a hard C.
Yeah.
And this is also at that same time, she said she had like waist long hair, and she went in and got her hair cut short, and has, at least from this album through now, rocked a flat top.
Yeah.
That is like, you know, her iconic look.
Yeah. So the cover of this prominently displays that flat top. It almost seems like it could become a signature like Grace Jones style.
Yeah, true. Let's get into the next track I want to play. I want to play her version of Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll because it's such a great song, and she does a good job with it.
Yeah, when I saw that you were going to feature this, I was like, that's fantastic. The only problem is you really can't just play a portion of this song and get the impact of it.
Yeah, if somehow you haven't heard this, go listen to the full song after this podcast episode, because, the whole point comes at the end.
Yeah.
And it's that systemic injustice is fucked up.
On that note.
On that note, here's Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, side B, track 1.
Williams and Singer killed poor Hattie Carroll with a cane that he twirled around his diamond ring finger at a Baltimore hotel. Society gathering, and the cops were called in, and his weapon took from him as they rode him in custody down to the station and booked Williams and Singer for first-degree murder. Oh, but you who philosophize disgrace and criticize all fear, take the rag away from your face. But now's not the time for your tears. Williams and Singer, who had 24 years, owns a tobacco farm of 600 acres and rich wealthy parents who provide and protect him, and high office relations in the politics of Maryland reacted to his deed with a shrug of the shoulders and swear words and sneering, and his tongue it was snarling. In a matter of minutes was on bail out walking. Oh, but you who philosophize disgrace and criticize all fear, take the rag away from your face. Now's not the time for your tears. Hattie Carroll was a maid of the kitchen. She was 51 years old and gave birth to 10 children who carried the dishes and took out the garbage and never sat.
Spoiler alert, Williams and Singer gets a slap on the wrist for the murder of Hattie Carroll, in case you hadn't heard that song.
Yeah. A 6-month sentence, is it, that he's handed out?
Yeah. And that is when you bury the rag deep in your face, because now is the time for your tears.
Yeah. Powerful song and a true story.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Phranc, obviously this was a cover that Phranc connected to and felt the need to bring back in the mid-1980s for people to hear again.
Yeah. As was a good move. It's a great song.
One that stays relevant, unfortunately.
Yeah.
50 plus years after it was written. 60 years. I don't know. It's been a long time now.
Ugh, sad country we got here.
Yeah.
Anyways, Phranc was, in the lesbian separatist communities in LA and learning silk screening and working on music. And Phranc was influenced by the women's music scene of the 1970s at this time. We covered Chris Williamson from Olivia Records on a previous episode if you want to know more about that scene. But she was inspired to move to San Francisco, expecting kind of a lesbian mecca there. And she found she was not really welcomed there. Phranc describes herself as a butch lesbian, and the sort of second wave feminism at the time really frowned upon the idea of lesbians adopting sort of masculine and feminine counterparts, as they saw it as recreating heterosexual relationships. So they kind of frowned upon it, which was unfortunate because butch lesbianism has a long history in the working class back like decades. And it is, it's an expression of who Phranc is. So that was unfortunate, but Phranc was very much welcomed into the punk community there.
Yeah. And that makes sense.
Yeah, they didn't care what about any of the high-minded stuff. But so Phranc ended up leaving San Francisco and going back to LA and just wanted to be in the punk world and wanted to play in a band. So she started hanging out at punk shows and was approached to join the band Nervous Gender,
Mm-hmm.
who are like electro punk pioneers.
Yeah, like synth punk.
Yeah.
Stuff similar to the Screamers. That was another LA synth punk band. Yeah.
Yeah, I put some on and it was super good, experimental. Not what I expected. When I think of punk, I just think of like early 90s skate punk or something. So
Yeah, so those early electro synth punk bands. There's another one called the Units. It's really interesting stuff that I imagine some punks would have turned their noses up to at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and after briefly being in Nervous Gender, she joined Catholic Discipline, which is how she ended up in the Decline of Western Civilization documentary, which those are amazing, by the way. If you haven't seen them, check them out.
Directed by Penelope Spheris, the sister of previously featured artist Jimmy Spheris.
Our very firstly featured artist.
Yeah, going back to episode 1 of I'd Buy That for $1.
Yeah. So Phranc saw a lot of overlap between the lesbian separatists that she ran with and the punk world. To her, like, these groups should be together because they're all mad at the same things. Like, they all want the same kinds of changes, but these groups, like, did not overlap at all at that time.
That's an ongoing problem.
Yeah.
Where the small little differences, rather than rallying around the bigger causes, letting those smaller little differences divide these movements.
Yeah, and there was the very real, there was a lot, and probably still is, a lot of misogyny in the punk realm.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch that documentary, I was like stunned at some of the things they were saying.
Yeah, and that is worth mentioning. As much as it's not surprising to me that they would have been welcoming of someone like Phranc, there were obviously still big issues within the punk world. I mean, Black Flag recorded "Slip It In." There's some, sometimes those punks will try to act like they were more open-minded and progressive retroactively than they actually were at the time. Some of them have obviously developed significantly since then, like Henry Rollins has come a long way, but yeah.
And Phranc took a stand against that. In the early 80s, Phranc wrote a song called Take Off Your Swastikas that is a really direct and potent song, and Phranc wanted to play it on an acoustic guitar because she wanted people to hear the words, because to her as a Jewish person, like, it's messed up for all these punks who say they're her friends to be running around with swastikas. And the common line of thinking in the punk world was it was meant to shock people and make them seem like edgy or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But as Phranc points out in the song, she confronts it pretty directly by saying fascism isn't anarchy over and over, which that just makes my fist pump right out the gate. And also, if it was you in those ovens, you wouldn't think it was so cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wow. It's direct. It's a potent message. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's what the best folk music is, right? Direct and potent with like an economy of words.
Very true. Also, I should also mention she was in an all-woman punk band called Castration Squad, which included Elisa Bello of the Go-Go's
Oh, nice.
and punk and feminist icon Alice Bagg was also in that band. So they were a very brief existing band with some members that went on to do some big things.
Mm-hmm.
After her punk days, Phranc described herself as being strung out in the early 80s. She kind of implies, I do want to shout out, I should shout this out now. There is an excellent project that I pulled a lot of this information from called the Women of Rock Oral History Project, being done by Tanya Pearson, where she is going around and interviewing these women from all over the rock world about their actual history from their own mouths. So that was incredibly helpful resource in, getting the facts on Phranc's story here.
Yeah, that's an important thing to document. I'm glad someone's doing it.
Yeah. So Phranc described herself as being strung out, implied there was a lot of like drug use and stuff going on in the punk world. And she decided to get clean and got really into swimming, which is that first song we played, One of the Girls, is about, the people she swims with. If you listen with that in mind, you're like, oh, that makes sense now.
Swim buddies.
Swim buddies, and she was super into it. That's actually, she'll regularly introduce herself as the all-American Jewish lesbian folk singer, but when she says all-American, she means like in the collegiate sense of like she's top 12 in the nation of being a Jewish lesbian folk singer. So I thought that was funnier than trying to like grasp at some kind of patriotism or something.
It's an important distinction.
Yeah. So Phranc started performing acoustically solo and was trying to get an album together and just got fed up with the process and decided to just fund it herself. And went in and recorded Folksinger, the album we are listening to. It ends up being released by Rhino Records, who previous to this were primarily only doing reissues and novelty records. And Phranc somehow knew the people and they were like, yeah, we'd love to put it out. So this is one of the earliest like real Rhino records out there.
Yeah, I tend to think of them still as like a reissue label.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, what they are mostly. But so this is the beginning of that, and I am just going to rip another song. We're going to play Life Lover, which it's another good song about loving life. And Phranc describes writing it in that period, getting off drugs when a bunch of people around her were dying of drug use or suicide. And she said she wanted to write this song so that she couldn't possibly consider ending her own life because she wrote this song. So it would just be goofy of her to do that. So she can't now. So that was cool, I thought. Here's Life Lover. Side 2. Track 6, the final track on the album.
The ultimate cut.
Recently, friends have been departing permanently, but not me. I plan to stick around, you see, 'cause I'm a life lover, that's me. Yes, recently, friends have been departing permanently, but not me. I plan to stick around, you see, 'cause I'm a life lover, that's me. Now all my parts work, my eyes and my nose, my hands, my fingers, my legs and my toes, and that makes me love life. Oh yes it does, I'm not gonna go away, I'm here to stay. Because recently, friends have been disappearing mysteriously. But not me, I plan to stick around, you see. Cause I'm a life lover, that's me. Now it hasn't always been easy, folks. Sometimes I get real depressed too. Hey, but if I can do it, then every single one of you can do it too. Cause recently, friends have been departing permanently. But not me, I plan to stick around, you see. Cause I'm a life lover, that's me. Yes, recently, friends have been departing permanently. But not me, I plan to stick around, you see. Cause I'm a life lover, that's me. I'm a life lover. I'm a life lover. I'm a life lover. Recently, friends have been
Nowadays, and for many, many years now, it's not uncommon for artists who started in the punk genre to eventually go towards more singer-songwriter or folk-based material. But this is 1985, and I have to imagine that Phranc was one of the first people from the punk movement to turn towards folk music. I mean, you had a few groups that were kind of doing the folk punk thing, like the Violent Femmes would predate this, and you had artists that did what I think they call cow punk, like that had like country, folk, and blues influences, like the Meat Puppets, Social Distortion, the Gun Club. But regardless, this is like that's like straight up folk right there.
Yeah, there's little to no punk evidenced in this album at all, I'd say.
Yeah.
Really only in spirit.
Aside from it sounds exactly like all the times I've gone and seen a local punk artist do a folk set. Like you talked about how there's, other artists that have combined folk and roots elements into it, but this like seems to have completely laid out the blueprint for being a former punk turned folk musician.
Yeah. This feels like a watershed moment.
Mm-hmm.
Where are all you punks citing Phranc?
There are some out there, but we'll get there. This album did end up putting Phranc on the map. It was a watershed moment. Phranc got invited to open for the Violent Femmes, who you just mentioned, along with Husker Du and the Pogues.
Oh yeah, that's another one. Yeah.
Yeah. And after her second record, I Enjoy Being a Girl, she was invited to open for the Smiths on what ended up being their final tour, and was playing for many, many thousands of people at that point.
Yeah, that's a high-profile gig right there.
Yeah, and went on to open for Morrissey when Morrissey went solo after that as well. Also, still very high profile.
Yeah.
And Phranc describes it, she saw it as her job to be in front of people and to be openly gay and be someone that, people in the crowd can look to and identify with and be like, it's okay for me to be this way. Here's a person who is celebrated in front of thousands of people. So I thought that was pretty cool. Phranc kind of hit her peak around 1991 with her popularity peak, I should say. With her third album, Positively Phranc. She was opening for Morrissey after that and was scheduled to open in Madison Square Garden a few days later, and she received a phone call that her brother had been murdered.
Oh,
and yeah, that seems to have really sent her life sideways. She left the tour and went right back home when she heard about it. And she kind of just fell out of the music world for a few years. And, she describes in the interview I saw that she kind of understands now. Like at the time it felt bad, but now she can look back and see like, well, I wasn't working, and if you're not working, the music industry doesn't care about you. They're moving on to the next thing. They're not going to wait around. So she did make a comeback. After a few years, she put on a show called Hot August Phranc, where she was doing Neil Diamond's repertoire and would dress up like Neil Diamond and do like the whole thing. So that kind of got her back into music. She went on to record another album, Milkman, in 1998, and another EP after that. And she still performs a little bit, but primarily has switched over to visual art at this point. She goes by the Cardboard Cobbler and makes absurdly real-looking art things out of cardboard. It'll just be like, like one of them I saw was an actual shoe, and it looks like a regular shoe, but it's made out of cardboard. And she'll do like chocolate bars and like, I don't know. It's pretty wild stuff.
And she was also really into Tupperware.
Oh, right. Yeah, she did have a run for a little while where she was like the top Tupperware seller out in LA. And she describes the internet as kind of ruining it. She definitely seems to have felt like a big sense of community with the Tupperware world previous to the internet, because you're going to people's houses, you're talking with them, you're meeting them. She would like sing songs about Tupperware. And yeah, she was really into it, and she didn't get the recognition she felt she deserved in the Tupperware world, and the internet ruined it.
You know, as evidenced by my title, I completely sympathize with her.
Peter gets it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she had a Tupperware face that sounded pretty cool too. And yeah, that's catches us up to now with Phranc.
Phranc in a nutshell. Well, Sean, what you got for us for recommended similar albums?
I have 3 records picked out if you want to dig further. The aforementioned Chris Williamson, we did the album The Changer and the Change from 1975. It was an influence on Phranc and similar themes, a little bit of a similar style, a decade apart, but an important listen, and you can go back and find that episode and listen to the music.
And worth noting, that's another Jeremy pick.
Yes.
True.
And then Suzanne Vega, self-titled from 1985, has some similarities, a little more like pop and rock on that record, but there's a similarity in delivery. They both have like deep-rooted folk influences going on.
Yeah, that was one of the first artists I thought of when listening to this.
I didn't think of that, but that makes a lot of sense now that you say it.
Yeah. And then last one, self-titled by Joan Armatrading from 1976.
Ah, yes. Another artist we previously featured on the pod.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Sean. And before we get out of here, I have a short installment of For the Record,
Peter's favorite,
where we correct misinformation stated in previous episodes of the podcast, because we want this to remain a credible source for research.
True.
Going back to our Bee Gees episode relatively recently, we said that the song New York Mining Disaster 1941 was their 3rd overall single. Let me just clarify something. It was their 3rd hit single. That was the 3rd song they had that was a significant hit. It was their 13th overall single at that point. They had cranked him out. On our Rick Derringer episode, we said that Rick Derringer, at the age of 17, had recorded all of the instrumentation for his band The McCoys' hit song Hang On Sloopy. Well, there was some confusing wording in the article that we sourced that information from. It was actually the band The Strangeloves who recorded the instrumental track on Hang On Sloopy. The Strangeloves were a writing and production team from Brooklyn, New York. They had a big hit with their song I Want Candy, which was well known for its Bo Diddley beats and, of course, the much later Bow Wow Wow cover of the song.
Oh, yeah.
So they had recorded their version of the song My Girl Sloopy, which was a song actually written by Wes Farrell and Burt Burns and first recorded by the Vibrations in the year 1964. And the Strangeloves found out that the Dave Clark Five were planning to record a version of My Girl Sloopy, and the Strangeloves wanted to beat them to it, but they didn't want to detract from the ongoing success of I Want Candy, which was a big hit at the time. They didn't want to release another single and draw away from I Want Candy. So right around the time that they were trying to record My Girl Sloopy, which they changed to Hang On Sloopy, they discovered a young Rick Derringer when they played a show with his band Rick and the Raiders in the Midwest in 1965. They immediately recognized the talent of the young group and brought Derringer and his band to New York to record the vocals over the already recorded instrumentation for Hang On Sloopy. And that, it was this garage band standard already, but what ended up the Rick and the Raiders, to avoid confusion with Paul Revere and the Raiders, they had the band revert to the original name, which had been the McCoys. That when Rick founded the band when he was very young, he called it the McCoys. I think we did mention that on the episode. And of course, that was the big hit. That's like the definitive version of My Girl Sloopy, Hang On Sloopy. So, while talking about the Strangeloves, one of the members of the Strangeloves was a guy named Jerry Goldstein, the producer, later on, the producer and songwriter for the band War. And on our War episode, a couple years ago, it's worth noting we did accidentally call Jerry Goldstein by the name Jerry Goldsmith a couple times, which Jerry Goldsmith is a different musician. He's a well-known film composer. I'm sure we're probably not the first people to mix Jerry Goldstein and Jerry Goldsmith up. But
I'm just stunned at your ability to remember all these things. But
it's all I think about. It's everything we've ever said on this podcast.
Wow. You're our biggest fan.
I am. On our very recent Blue Ridge Rangers episode, I will take the blame for this. When we were talking about Fogerty's songs being, like Great American Songbook material, I mentioned I heard it through the grapevine as being like a song I've known my whole life. Well, of course, John Fogerty did not write I Heard It Through the Grapevine. That's a Motown song written by Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong, recorded by the Miracles, Gladys Knight and the Pips, and Marvin Gaye well before Creedence Clearwater Revival did their version.
Yeah.
And that is everything I have for this installment of For the Record.
Fantastic. I'm humiliated.
It wasn't your fault, Jeremy. That Rick Derringer.
Oh, don't call me. Oh, I was just kidding. But wow.
That article was very confusingly worded. I actually went and edited the Wikipedia article to make it more clear that Rick didn't record all the instruments on Hang On Sloopy.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah. Going back to Phranc, though, do we have any final thoughts? This is a very unique and interesting record you've brought here, Jeremy.
Yeah, and
and high quality.
Yeah, it's of a high quality. It was unknown to me before very recently. It's like flown under the radar, but it is highly influential in certain circles, specifically the LA queercore movement that would follow it, and the Riot Girl movement. There are multiple people who have cited Phranc as being a big influence. So,
oh yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if like Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill cites her.
Yeah. So yeah, this it's like one of those things that has a big presence in certain circles, but I want it out into all the circles. So here's Phranc.
Out into the circles, Phranc goes.
Cool.
Well, what did you pick as the final selection?
Oh, right. I picked Caroline for the final song because I like it. I think it's a good song. And this one definitely feels in the more like Olivia Records vein. It's kind of an intimate song about having a crush on someone. So
Yeah, which of course, yeah, like that Chris Williamson album, that hearing songs in, what was that, 1975?
yeah,
Hearing a woman sing a song about affection for another woman I got like goosebumps listening to that. And I think 85, it's still pretty substantial to hear that.
yeah, still not normalized at that point, I'd say, and it's just a good song. So we're gonna leave with that one.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, listeners, for tuning in to yet another episode of I'd Buy That for $1. You can check us out on social media, Instagram at I'd Buy That Podcast, Facebook, I'd Buy That for $1. We also have an I'd Buy That for $1 group where we share records, cheap finds. Come be a part of our community. This is Peter Cook signing off.
I'm Jeremy Ruggles.
And I'm Sean Hartman.
Here's Caroline, Side B, Track 5.
Carolyn, I am crazy about you, 'cause no one I know has muscles like you, and no one is quite as handsome as you are. Oh, Carolyn, I'm impressed by you. And Carolyn, you inspire me, 'cause I wanna be strong as you, and I wanna lift the same barbells you do. 'Cause Carolyn, I wanna be strong like you. It's no small thing, I've got a crush on your hamstrings. I've got a crush on your everything.